life. It is the most precious of God's gifts, so fragile, so innocent. In the creation of a human life, God pours forth an incredible display of His greatness. There is nothing on this earth which calls out more to the human heart than a child. There is nothing more miraculous than the mystery of life. The baby in the womb of the mother, the soul breathed into that child by God Himself, though not yet introduced or seen by the eyes of the world, already loved, kept safe and protected as God intends. Every child is born with gifts, passions, dreams, talents, a fascination for God's beauty and truth, which is all around them. These things must be fostered, cared for, and guarded. It is a great responsibility given to a mother and father to train and teach a child to grow, to know, love, and serve God. This is the role of the parent, to be there for the life which has been entrusted to them, to be there to assist the soul that God has created, and to make sure that soul has a clear pathway to heaven, and to be there to defend that life from the evil in this world, spiritually, yes, but also physically. Evil is present in our world. We know this. We see this. And there are times when evil corrupts a person's heart and mind to the degree that that person is willing to do harm to another. Just as we are to fight for and protect the dignity of life when it is attacked by spiritual forces, we also must be prepared to fight for and protect life when it is confronted or threatened by evil that manifests through others who have given themselves over to evil's grasp. We must be prepared to protect and defend.
There's one teaching of the Catholic Church that many people know very little about, or it's completely misunderstood, or to some it's not known at all. And that's a teaching on the subject of self-defense. Now, there are some out there who believe that if there's a threat of bodily harm, if you're being physically attacked, you should not ever lift a hand in defense of yourself. They see that as an act of violence, a measure of violence that the Lord, our God, would never want us to do. That is simply untrue. There are those who will interpret certain scripture passages as saying that we should never protect and defend ourselves. Again, not completely understood correctly. The Church's teaching on it is clear. Not only do we have a right to defend and protect ourselves in the threat of bodily harm, but in certain cases, we have a grave duty to do so, especially when it comes to protecting those who've been entrusted to our care. Now, this has been written clearly by St. Thomas Aquinas, by St. John Paul II himself. This is something that we need to understand better. Why? Because in our world today, we have situations where physical violence, sadly, unfortunately, falls upon people. When we lose the interior battle, we will deal with it in the exterior. And people who lose that battle inside of anger, of rage, of a desire to sexually assault someone, when they lose that battle and they have to act upon this, they act upon this exteriorly, we have to be ready to protect and defend against that, especially if we've been given the care of other people. Those of us who are husbands and fathers, wife and children, we have a responsibility to not only understand this teaching, but then to prepare, to be ready. A couple of things need to be done here. Number one, we need to get out of our minds this idea that we should never lift a finger in protection and defense of ourselves or others. And number two, we need to understand that because the world has these situations where evil does manifest in these physical attacks at times, we need to not only accept that reality and know that this is around us at times, we have to prepare for it. Which means it's not enough to just say, I will fight for my family, I will protect and defend, but we should have an idea how to do that.
I told these guys, it's important. As a Catholic man, you've got to learn how to fight. I believe Hey! Buddy, please. Because St. Thomas Aquinas says, grace builds upon nature. If you teach your boys to be physical, if you teach your boys combat training, if you teach your boys the importance of being a sheepdog, they carry this into their Catholic faith. Two, rest. That's taxing, I know that.
I was born and raised a Catholic, grew up in the 70s and 80s in the suburbs of Southern California where liberalism reigned. I didn't really have a good grasp of my Catholic faith. I gravitated more towards the martial arts. I watched the Bruce Lee movie in 1973, Enter the Dragon, boom, that was it. I want to be the Mexican Bruce Lee. Started training in karate, Tang Soo Do Korean karate from the age of 12 to about the age of 18. At the age of 18, my instructor says, you've got a real aggressive streak to you and a real knack for martial arts. I also joined the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. I actually worked as a civilian 2 years before I got hired. From the age of 19 and 20, I worked as a civilian in the LA Sheriff's Department and went into the academy at the age of 21. Worked for 20 years in law enforcement. Within working in law enforcement as a deputy sheriff, I had a conversion in my mid to late 20s. A metanoia, where I just fell in love with Jesus Christ, and I all of a sudden realized that He's God and that the church is the pillar and foundation of truth. I had an entire makeover mentally and spiritually, where all of a sudden I didn't see self-defense and martial arts as the most important thing, because it was very important. In fact, I even ran a boxing gym for many years. I competed as a high-level amateur nationally in kickboxing. But once I had a conversion experience and I understood that Jesus Christ should be the most important thing in anybody's life, all of a sudden my priorities changed. It doesn't mean I turned into a wimp, and went to a cave and just hid for the world and just prayed day and night. There's nothing wrong with that. There's hermits for that. But that's not what I'm called to. I'm called to take my faith into the world. I was now compelled and informed and moved more by my Catholic faith than anything else once I encountered Christ.
When you had this conversion, this deepening of your faith, you say it didn't cause you to be a wimp. It didn't cause you to throw an understanding of the need to train and be prepared out the window. It changed the appreciation for it and the way you looked at it?
Absolutely. St. Thomas Aquinas says, God's grace works upon human nature. So when God's grace, His sanctifying grace really came into my life, and I realized, hey, I got to live in a state of grace. This is serious. Death, judgment, heaven, and hell. When I started living the life of a Catholic and practicing my Catholic faith, God's grace superimposed itself upon my nature. I had a nature, I was competitive, I was an athlete. I just was a problem solver. And so God's grace that came into my life just used my flawed character, my flawed personality to make me a better person and to integrate what I would call, the soul and the spirit.
So you have this conversion, you start traveling and speaking, you retire from law enforcement, now you're full-time evangelist. You travel all over to talk about the Catholic faith. And one of the things I know we've talked a lot about, you see, I see, is an area of Catholic manhood that seems to really be missing the mark. And that is a man understanding that fighting spirit and the importance of him being prepared to protect and defend those that God has entrusted to his care in particular, as well as himself. How do you see that kind of lay of the battlefield where men are with an understanding or lack thereof regarding legitimate self-defense? And the church is teaching on that, and where men are falling short in that.
A lot of men have been effeminized by the culture, and a lot of men have been shouted down by the radical feminist culture. And some men have brought it upon themselves, with the whole Me Too movement, although it's been politicized. But there has been some very bad men out there that have done some very bad things. And as Catholics, what we want to do is we want to integrate our Catholic faith, we have to inform everything we do with our Catholic faith. It has to, our worldview, our morality, our not value system, a life of virtue, a life of moral excellence. All of this has to be informed by our Catholic faith, but it doesn't mean you have to become a wimp. Catholicism doesn't mean you have to become a wimp. In fact, when you look at the great treasury that we have in the Catholic faith, some of the greatest saints that I know of, again, talking about the men, were ordered very strongly as men. They were emotionally ordered and oriented very strongly as men. I mean, they weren't effeminate.
So, I mean, Jesse, a lot of Catholic men today, a lot of Christian men in general, regardless of the denomination, have let the effeminization, the emasculation take place. And this has been a problem. We've seen it. We know there's a lot of speakers out there talking about this.
Cardinal Burke spoke about it.
Exactly. So we know this is something that is becoming more prevalent, and it's an issue. One of the things that I know we both talked a lot about, that we find, is men understanding not only their role to provide for the family, important, spiritually protect the family, important, but the physical part seems to be left out of the equation in a lot of cases. And when I say physical, I don't mean being in shape, being prepared, having a plan, processing and training your family in that. How do you see that as an important part, as an integral part, and a duty, a moral duty for a Catholic man?
You'll see that the New Testament uses all kinds of metaphors about athletes, okay? So St. Paul or the New Testament writers are not going to use metaphors about fight the good fight. I don't punch the air. I box, but I don't punch the air. I don't shadow box. Run to win. Keep your eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, for we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses in a stadium. All the metaphors that the New Testament uses draws from the Greek Olympics, called the Isthmian Games. It draws from sports. We do not wrestle with flesh and blood, but we wrestle against principalities. So God is communicating something to us there, because God wouldn't use language that's intrinsically evil to speak His word. Secondly, when you read the fathers of the church, the great saints, and especially recently St. John Paul II, they were huge proponents of sports, because the fathers and the saints and Pope John Paul II would talk about, they would say, the person who exercises has a better prayer life. They have more clarity of thought. They're more lucid in their thinking. So you could see there's a whole patrimony of Catholic saints and fathers that talk about the connection between the body and the soul, that somebody who exercises, somebody who sweats and it gets physical, they have a better prayer life.
In 2009, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI wrote that the real problem at this moment of our history is that the presence of God is disappearing from the human horizon. And with this dimming of the light of God, humanity is losing its bearings with more evident destructive effects. How do we Christians respond to a statement such as that? How do we see ourselves fitting into these times that the Holy Father writes about? This very serious moment in history, these destructive effects that are happening all around us, which we see very clearly every day. How do we respond to this? Do we just look at these moments and think, yeah, it's bad, but you know what? Just going to pray about it, and then we sometimes just stick our heads in the sand and leave them there. But what do we do to be ready, to be prepared? Knowing, as we've talked about earlier in the program, the Church's teaching is very clear regarding the right and the responsibility of self-defense. How do we then put that into practice? What are we doing to be better prepared, to be trained, especially to protect those that God has entrusted to us?
As a man, the things we often think about are that we're called to pray for those that God's given us to love, especially your wife and children. But we're also called to provide for them, which means work. And St. Joseph is such a great example for that. But we also have to protect them. Protection can take different forms. You have St. Joseph, who in the middle of the night gets Mary and Jesus up and flees into another country. That's protecting it. But if someone was attacking your wife or your children, you would have a duty to do what you could to protect them. It seems to me that's an act of love. And it's recognizing that the man's role in the home is not only to be nurturing, but also at times to protect them from what are lies, to protect them from what are deceptions, and to protect them from what even physically could harm them.
We know the church teaches this conversation that is not had very much about legitimate self-defense, that there is a time when it is not only a right to protect and defend, but it's a duty. So we have to be physical. We have to recognize the physical component of that. How does that translate then to a man, taking that seriously and then acting upon it so that he has a plan?
Every single man should have a battle plan. For example, in my house, I have weapons in different rooms. I've got an alarm. Basic things like letting the neighbors know. Having a relationship with the neighbor, said, hey, I'm gone for the weekend. Can you watch the house? Okay? Neighbors to the right, left, in front of you and behind you. And as a Catholic man, security is our responsibility. It's not the wife's responsibility. As Catholics, the Catechism very clearly, as you well know, 2263 to 2265, you can read it yourself. It talks about the responsibility, the obligation of self-defense. And that falls upon the shoulders of a man, not the shoulders of a woman. When you look at the Bible, some of the great heroes of the Bible understood the importance of self-defense. Who? King David. He slew Goliath. 1 Samuel 17, you can read it. Did he murder Goliath? No. There's a different word in Hebrew for murder. He killed Goliath. And the word that's used in Hebrew indicates he did it in self-defense, that it was justified. There's two different words in Hebrew.
What duty does a man have to train his sons to be able to protect their families?
A man has the obligation to make their sons sheepdogs. There's three types of men out there. Wolves, bad men. Sheeps, sissies, and effeminate men, people that are just disconnected from their faith. And sheepdogs. Those are men that are properly formed in their faith, but they're also men of action, like the Knights of Templar, like the Crusaders. Jesus is our shepherd. And Jesus, yes, all of us are called sheep. But within this agrarian culture, what do all shepherds have that help them guard the sheep? All shepherds have sheepdogs. Who are the sheepdogs? Men. Men are natural sheepdogs by virtue of the way you were made by God anatomically. You are called to be within the sheepfold. You're called to be a sheepdog in service to the good shepherd, which is Jesus Christ. Why? Because there's wolves around. And Jesus told us there's wolves that want to come and steal and rob the sheep. Guys, it's simple. Three types of men out there. Which one are you? Are you a bad guy? Or are you a wolf? Are you an effeminate guy checked out, indifferent, lukewarm? Are you that type? You know what you aren't? That's a sheep. That's a sissy. That's an effeminate. Or are you a sheepdog? A sheepdog is a properly integrated man that's a man of faith and a man of action.
A lot of guys have been raised not knowing anything or much about self-defense. The idea of it is new. The idea that, the understanding that I have to have a plan to protect my family. I have to figure something out. I can't teach my sons what I don't know. What advice do you got for the guys out there that have no clue where to get started and how to get started?
I would say, number one, most men have to just be more physical. Too many men are just couch potatoes. Simple stuff is going to start percolating those juices that already flow through the veins of a man. For example, start doing push-ups, guys. I got a push-up bar here. I do 250 push-ups a day. I spend a lot of time in this office. So I have it there. I do them in sets of 50. Just start getting those juices flowing. I got a pull-up bar. Every time I pass in the hallway, I'll try to do 5 or 10 pull-ups throughout the day. I pass by there about 10 times. Push-up bar, pull-up bar. Basic things where you're already starting to make yourself feel uncomfortable. You're starting to put pressure on yourself. You're starting to get the juices flowing. So many guys haven't done any of these things since they were in middle school or high school. And so That's a start right there, Doug. Start doing stuff like, hey, walking at night 3 miles, ride a bike, start swimming at 30 minutes a day. We got to get men to first base. We got to get men to start being more physical. And then step 2, we can get men to start saying, okay, with this body that God has given me, all of a sudden I can feel that I have muscles and I have the ability to do things. We could get men into basic self-defense. My father affected me when I was 9 years old to this very day, and my other 3 brothers. Here's what happened. We went to a restaurant, a Mexican restaurant in Southern California, city of San Fernando, after Holy Mass. My father was a lector, part of the Legion of Mary, very involved in the parish. I saw him praying the rosary every day with my mom. They were both part of the Legion of Mary. And one day when we were walking out of this restaurant, our car was parked in an alley. And as we're going to the car, we walked into a rape in progress. My father told my mom, go back in the restaurant, call 911, pre-cell phone days. My sister went in there with her, told all the 4 boys to go in there with mom. We said, no, we're gonna stay here, watch dad. Okay, this is training. We wanna see what dad's gonna do. Dad took off his tie and his shirt, okay? He's probably in his late 30s, early 40s. This is a young guy. Opens the back door of the car, and I'm watching other men come out of the restaurant, and they're seeing a rape in progress, and they're grabbing their wives or girlfriends, and they're running to their car, to the left or to the right. And I'm saying, where are the guys to help out my dad? Where's the guys? A woman's getting attacked here by a man. I want to do something. I'm 9 years old, but I can't. I feel impotent. My dad opened that door, jumped on that thug's back, and that's what he was. He was a thug. And my dad started clocking him. I mean, just like a piston. The base of his skull. Weaken him, soften him up, put him in a chokehold, dragged him out of the car, and he went unconscious. The police came. We could hear the sirens. They came out. The woman who was being raped and accosted, she came out and she told the police, officers, she's crying, that man right there saved my life. I was being raped. I was being raped by that man. And that gentleman right there saved my life. The police arrested the thug, the crook. They told my mom and dad, and we heard the conversation. They said, Mr. Romero, thank you very much. We've been looking for him for about 3 years. They ran a wants and warrants. They said he's a serial rapist in Southern California. We've been looking for him for 3 years. Congratulations, you're a hero for saving her life. At that moment, I said, wow, Catholicism is for men. I saw my dad receive Holy Communion an hour before. Lector, usher, Legion of Mary. And I saw my dad also, when he had to take action, he took action. I asked him on the way home, Dad, were you afraid? He goes, son, he says, we have God on our side. He doesn't. Poor guy, he doesn't have God. What am I afraid of? We have God. I never forgot that to this day, and I'm 56. I can only imagine what would have happened in my little 9-year-old mind if I would have saw my dad cower down, look terrified, grab my mom by the hand and say, run for the car. And all 5 kids run behind my dad. If I would have saw my father do that, that would have affected me for the rest of my life. I would have said, is this Catholicism? Is this what we do in the face of evil and danger? We run away from it? It could have turned out it could have turned out different for me had my dad cowered down. I would probably be a different man today.
So let's be clear. In the end, what does this boil down to? When you bring up the subject of self-defense, there are people out there who will say, that's about fear. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to live that way. I don't want to live my life thinking I have to be afraid someone's going to hurt me all the time. That's not what this is about. It's not about fear. It's about being cautious. It's about duty, and it's about love. It's about loving enough that we will be prepared to protect and defend the life of another. To be prepared to protect and defend our own lives. As St. Thomas Aquinas states, we are more bound to protect ourselves than the attacker who would be coming at us. This is a subject that rarely gets talked about. and yet should be talked about. As much as we are pro-life, and we should be a very pro-life people, but as much as we want to protect and defend the life of the unborn child, why would we not want to protect and defend the life of that child once that child is born and walking, living, breathing in this world? Us. Why would we not be prepared to protect and defend against those who cooperate with evil and try to harm our loved ones? In Revelation chapter 12, we're told that a great battle broke out in heaven and that the demons lost that battle. It was led by Michael the archangel. He defeated Lucifer and the fallen angels, and there was no longer a place for them in heaven, and they were cast down to earth. We're in occupied territory. We're behind enemy lines. There's much goodness in this world. There's a lot of great, wonderful, amazing things in this world that God gives us, but there is a presence of evil, and that presence is very real. And every time we sin, we are cooperating with evil. But there are some who cooperate with it to the degree that they are willing to inflict harm on others. And this happens daily all over the world. So no matter what you do, never lay your sword down on the battlefield and walk away. No matter what the attack is or where that threat is coming from, spiritually or physically, have an idea what you're going to do. Be trained, be prepared, be battle ready, and do it out of love.